Alright, this is The Lord is One with another Bible lesson video. This time we're looking at Isaiah chapter 11, verses 1 to 5 and 11 to 12. And the verses read, "There shall come forth a rod from the root of Jesse, and a flower shall grow out of his root. The Spirit of God shall rest upon him, the Spirit of wisdom and understanding, the Spirit of counsel and might, the Spirit of knowledge and godliness, the Spirit of the fear of God shall fill him. He shall not judge by reputation, nor convict by common talk. He will judge the cause of the humble, and reprove the humble of the earth. He shall strike the earth with the words of his mouth, and with the breath of his lips he shall slay the ungodly. He shall gird his loins with righteousness, and cover his sides with truth." Alright, so before I go on to the next verses, let's look at these verses quickly. So this is obviously a prophecy of Jesus, but this prophecy works for several reasons. First, it talks a lot about Jesus' life and tells an accurate depiction of him. It mentions the Spirit of God will rest upon him. Now this is an obvious reference to Jesus' baptism, where the Holy Spirit descends on Jesus in the form of a dove. And there's another point here, again, that it also mentions that he comes forth from the root of Jesse. Again, it mentions him as a descendant of Jesse, which is also, accurate to Jesus. It also says that he will strike with the words of his mouth, and with the breath of his lips he shall slay the ungodly. And so, notice how it says he will slay the ungodly. He does it with the breath of his lips and with the words of his mouth. And he will cover his righteousness and cover his sides with truth. So he will use words of truth. He will use his words in order to judge people. And that's exactly what we see during his first coming. That he speaks using his words, parables, in order to effectively slay the ungodly, at least in the effective method. And so this verse is a very good picture of Jesus. And there's a couple more things to note here. Two important details to note here is that even Jewish commentators identify this as a passage referring to the coming Messiah. And a second point to talk about is historicity of even this passage, because again, this comes from the book of Isaiah, which we have almost pretty much a complete copy of in the Dead Sea Scrolls. So that's very significant to, the identification of this passage. So that actually fulfills two of the four criteria, which are incredibly important in identifying Old Testament prophecies to make them incredibly strong and persuasive. But let's continue on with the other verses. Now we look at verses 11 to 12. "It shall come to pass that in the day of the Lord shall show his hand again to be zealous for the remnant left of his people, left by the Assyrians and by Egypt, Babylon, and Ethiopia, by the Elamites, and from the rising of the sun, and out of Arabia. He shall set a sign up for the Gentiles, and will assemble the lost ones of Israel. He shall gather together the dispelled of Judah from the four corners of the earth." So again, it speaks of him as a sign for the Gentiles. Again, this also fulfills something in Jesus that we know came to pass, that the Gentiles would come to follow Jesus. And that's actually a third criteria. So the first two is one, Jewish recognition of this passage as a messianic passage. The second one is that we know that the text predates Jesus with a manuscript evidence, and we have that for this passage. And the third one is that it talks about something or predicts something that is historically certain. And the Gentiles coming to believe in Jesus is something that is historically certain. And then the fourth one is New Testament recognition of this passage. And there are places in the New Testament where different prophecies from Isaiah are referred to as belonging to Jesus. And there is a place where this specific passage is referred to refer to Jesus, specifically in reference to the Gentiles. And we'll get to that in some of my later videos. And so, ultimately, this passage is such a good passage for the Messiah, for identifying Jesus, for 4 reasons, which are, 1, Jewish recognition, 2, the fact that we have manuscript evidence for this specific text, 3, that it comes from a historically certain event with Jesus, and 4, the New Testament identifies it as being a prophecy referring to Jesus. So, thank you for watching, and God bless.